We all grew up on TV shows like Law and Order, for example. I'm curious, what is it about the felony court that TV series get completely wrong?
Almost everything. It's interesting because there's so many like shows like Law and Order, right? For instance, has been around forever. I mean, at least I give that show some credit for laying out that, the police officer's job is one thing and then a prosecutor's job is in court, right? So at least they
keep it separate.
They kind of explain that aspect of it. Unlike, other shows where, you go to a crime scene and within an hour you have DNA and everything else, which it's just, yeah, I mean, TV is TV, right? It's entertainment and they have to put everything in an hour. So they're not going to be able to get it right. It's interesting because of TV shows like that the jury, somebody that comes in and gets selected as a juror, has this, right, this kind of a predetermined idea of what may happen. I mean, you read the charges to a jury and the person is charged with first-degree murder and they're like, oh my God, right? But I mean, it's a charge. So you don't know anything about it, right? Quite yet. And I have to sometimes remind jurors that simply because of the charge, you haven't heard what the evidence is. So you can't be automatically, right, have a thing like, oh my God, it's murder, it must be serious, he must have done it, right? Like you have to advise jurors. That's why the jury selection process requires us to do a lot of explaining about the procedure and what's done. It's funny because of TV shows, jurors after a verdict will be like, well, why didn't they present DNA? Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do this, right? So the jurors become their own kind of detectives back there, right? And I think it's influenced by various shows, crime shows they watch. Because I'm telling you, so many times I ask the question of, what do you like to do in your spare time? Is there some kind of TV shows you like to watch, things you like to read? What do you like to read? Kind of a general idea about what the hobbies, interests of the juror is. And so many say, oh, I love the true crime podcast, or I love the, crime TV shows, things like that. So they're already coming in with that. So now they hear about a case and, it's going to take more, usually more complex trials that go to jury will take a couple of days or up to a week, or something even more complex could, take 2 weeks. So now they're hearing all this evidence, right? And then they go back and then they're kind of doing their own detective work, right? Piecing it back there. So it's funny at talking to jurors after how they like try to ask me questions about, what about this? I said, I don't put on the case. I have no knowledge about the facts. I don't present anything, so I can't answer those questions for you. So, but sometimes I have to educate the jurors about, sometimes you don't get DNA. Sometimes, there's a backlog in the lab that nobody knows about, about trying to get things tested and what they test. So it's the TV shows really don't do us any favors as far as like trying to, run a criminal courtroom, because everybody's expectations are something from TV and it's just not that. There's just expectations, I would say, by even defendants, witnesses, victims, about the process. Like it's, you come into a courtroom and take a witness stand and you're going to get asked questions by both sides, right? So you're going to have a direct examination and a cross-examination, where sometimes witnesses just feel like they could just come in and say their piece and leave. Well, it's not how it works, right?
It's not like on TV.
Right. Attorneys don't get to just say things, right? Like in those shows, they get to argue things, that are not facts, nothing presented, just making these arguments. Like it's just not how it works.
I always love when they pull the evidence that nobody knows about,
right,
and that just got delivered to them 2 hours before the trial.
Right, exactly. And I think that, because that doesn't happen in real life, that you don't have those things in the courtroom. But that's why I think that a lot of jurors may be quite like, well, why didn't they present DNA, right? And I'm like, Well, remember the part where there was a DNA expert that said they tried to test it and they couldn't get anything? Like, did you forget that part of the evidence? You know what I mean? So, like, asking me why a DNA expert didn't find, a conclusatory match of some sort, right? Well, and that's it's interesting because that's the other thing. There's like, DNA experts will not give you a match, right? It's not like this is this person's DNA. They'll give you this is 1 in whatever, octrillion, how many zeros you have behind, like 1 in so many people. So the odds are such that it's obviously this person. But there's a lot of DNA experts that the way, as an expert, that they testify, they don't just say, like, this is a match. They have to say, this is a match to this degree of scientific certainty. Right?
Again, that's something that's missing from TV shows.
Right. So it's, that tends to, like, surprise people. Like, well, why can't they just say it's them? Like, well, let's listen to the testimony of the expert. They explain it to you, right? So there's a lot of things that TV is TV. But I think because a lot of people watch TV, they have these expectations when they come into a courtroom. So, and for instance, such as witnesses just trying to say whatever they want to say without being asked the question, right? Or somebody in a gallery, like, standing up and objecting when that's not your role, right? To just stand up and, like, I can't have any disruptions in the courtroom, so you got to ask them to leave, especially in front of a jury, right? So there's a lot of that goes on, that it's more what I would say just the kind of disruptive behavior, and I think it's caused by a lack of knowledge of how to act in a courtroom or your expectations in a courtroom, right? Every trial is interesting, I'll say that.
Let's talk about the jury duty. You must have heard every excuse imaginable why someone cannot be the juror in a case. What are some of those excuses that people come up with?
People come up with some excuses, but it's more of just, you could tell that they just don't, like, they have to work, a lot of it is just, well, I just don't want to, and I don't believe in guns, or, just try to, like, I don't believe in domestic violence. I'm like, well, I don't think anybody believes in domestic violence. So, that's not the point. Like,
they're trying to show bias from the get-go.
Yeah, they're trying to show bias in a way, right? Like, well, I don't like gangs, things to that effect. And I have to explain, well, I don't think anybody likes gangs, or I don't think anybody's support of domestic violence. That's not the issue. It's whether you could listen to the evidence and apply the law and decide the case with, your 11 fellow jurors. So it becomes a lot of explanation. But I think there's people who, and it seems, I guess, maybe a little better in my mind. And I'm hoping it's because of my kind of opening statements to jurors that they feel a little better about serving as jurors. Because one of the things I say is, next to military service, serving as a juror is one of the most important aspects of being a citizen of this country, because it is a jury trial is one of the unique things about the U.S. Justice system, right? So you need people to serve as jurors, and you need people to take their time and do that public service as a citizen. So I try to kind of talk about that in my opening remarks, so that people kind of take it seriously and don't think that it's not, it doesn't mean anything if I get off of jury duty, or because I try to impress that it does mean a lot, that people try to, take the time and be selected as jurors. But of course, you're going to have, somebody that has work requirements that, it really is going to be a big financial hardship. I'll take that into consideration, obviously. I mean, school or work is usually not an excuse, but I mean, if somebody's being genuine and explaining, why they can't serve for one reason or another, whether it's a financial hardship. I mean, there's caretakers, right? They have to take care of somebody that's disabled, or an elderly parent, or 5 young children, I mean, that is something that I have them share with us, so that we can give those people some accommodation, especially if the parties agree to give them the accommodation. So, silly excuses, yes, I usually don't tolerate them. But I obviously, I'd like people to be comfortable enough to share what the hardship is. And then I could explain to them, well, that's something that I feel or I understand, but, jury service is very important. So if you get selected, you need to serve.
So what would you say to someone who's listening to this podcast and just got their jury summons in the mail?
Show up.
And they're trying to conceive the master plan of how they're not going to be selected.
Right. Well, once again, I would say don't do it. Don't do that, right? When you get a jury service summons, go to your jury service summons. Obviously, if there's, I think it's if you're over a certain age, you can get exempted or whatever. There's certain things that you could call and say, can you put my name in for next time because I'm out of town, right, or something. I mean it's all reasonable excuses, but don't try to automatically get a jury summons like, how do I get out of this? Like, no. Your focus should be, oh, this is great, how can I serve as a juror, right? That's what I try to impart on people. It doesn't work too much.
Doesn't work too often. Do lawyers make good jurors, or are they getting dismissed quite quickly?
I think, generally speaking, I would say, I think a lot of attorneys do not get selected. I think because the parties, one side or the other, will strike them for one reason or another. But I've had attorneys serve. They serve. I don't think there's any difference about how they serve. I know I've heard stories of judges being selected as a juror, but then, of course, the other jurors will, right, go to that judge. Like, what do you think, right? So, I mean, everybody can serve. Just because you're a judge or an attorney doesn't mean you shouldn't serve or you can't serve. But, of course, that's up to the parties, right? During jury selection, I think some attorneys vow to never have an attorney on a jury panel, so they just excuse an attorney, which is fine, But I mean, everybody's can serve, so it's just a matter of the attorneys and how do you, kind of approach jury selection, who you want to serve.